This is a presentation of National Streaming Sports. Over 20 podcasters, 70 weekly shows, and a 3.4-star rating on Roku TV. Sports Memories with Mac, Jack, and Doc on Northeast Streaming Sports. Every Saturday at 8 a.m. Yes, sir. Every Saturday. We made it to Saturday. How you doing today, folks? We're here with your Mac, Jack, and Doc Sports Memory Show. Doc is on a mini vacation, so we brought up from our bullpen, from the farm system, our all-star utility player, our all-star co-host, James Martin. And we're going to have a lot of fun today, folks. I know Jack wants to say something already. I know Jack's face now. That's how
you got me perfect. I was going to give James a compliment. He's the DJ Lambeau of this show.
Yes, he is. He's the DJ Lambeau. He's a guy that can field any topic, any show.
James is now looking up DJ's batting average as soon as I said
it. Yes, he is. He is definitely looking up.
Look it up, James, please.
Yes. Okay. So today, folks, we got three very interesting people we're going to talk about from the world of sports. We got Casey Stangel. We're going to talk about one of the greatest managers in baseball history. James is going to tackle that for us. Jack will tell us a little bit about the great lightweight champion back in the 40s, 50s era, Ike Williams. And I'm going to tell you about one of the greatest coaches of all time. He happened to coach for Green Bay. But first, we're going to James. We're going to let him handle Casey Stangel. And, of course, me and Jack know a little bit about the Yankees, so we can add some information there. But, James, take it away.
Yeah, man. When you gave me this subject matter, I was like, who is Casey Stangel, man? I was like, okay. I did some research on this gentleman. I think he's one of the more, if not one of the greatest managers of a baseball team. Very colorful, hilarious guys you probably would ever read about. Born in 1890, this guy had an early baseball career starting around 1912 as a player, and he went to the minors and went through a few teams. He was actually pretty decent. He was okay. Here and there, it's like he was up and down as a player, but at times he would have moments where he had some greatness, and he bounced around a lot, the league versus minors and majors. But John, when he got to the he got called up to the Brooklyn Dodgers at first and had decent success there. But his better time was when he was with the New York Giants under John McGraw. And he was that's where he first learned not to just be a good player, but he started learning coaching there. He started learning management. And I think John McGraw saw some skills in that guy. And to transition his career from player to ultimately manager. And he taught him how to do what's called platooning, I believe. Platooning where they would take guys and take lefties to go right, vice versa. And it was pretty interesting to hear that. And also to hear that this guy also early on in his career, I know he goes as KC because it was considered KC because he's from Kansas City, Missouri. That's where he was born. But he was also known as the old professor. And you can see a guy like this. Why are you considering him an old professor? It's because he was considered assistant professor when he was at one year as a baseball coach at Ole Miss prior to his 2014 spring. And so I'm impressed so far with this guy, with who he is. But when he gets it, when he finishes, I think he wins two championships. He wins 2 World Series with John McGraw with the Giants, and then goes into managing. He has decent level success, but most of the teams that he was with, they were fairly middle of the road. He didn't really have any much success. He didn't have any, but he managed for like 20 years until he finally got to a minor league team that was in the Pacific Coast League, and that was the Oakland Oaks. And the Oakland Oaks hadn't won a pennant since 1928, but in 1948, he ended up winning their league championship, and that's when George Weiss, the general manager of the New York Yankees, was looking to recruit him. At the behest of the owners and a few other people, because of how just he was, how colorful he was with the media, with the fans. They didn't really want to take him on as a manager, but he did, because I think there was a few people, including John McGraw and George Weiss, that saw something in him that was just considered to be a very talented guy that could be a leader of men. And it showed, because ultimately he came there to that team in 1949, and they had, Joe DiMaggio was already on the team. And from what I understand, they didn't really get along very well, but they had the respect of one another. And that was a season. As soon as he came on, there was talent there, but there were a lot of guys. They had a lot of injuries that year in 49. But lo and behold, the same guy that was platooned before, he took on that same system and did it with the players that he had, and was able to string some wins together. And of course, after 78 games off, Joe DiMaggio was able to come back, and these guys went on to win the pennant, and they won the World Series. And you look five titles later, these guys have won 5 world titles. He had the talent, of course, of Yogi Berra. He had the talent of Billy Martin, Whitey Ford. Very impressive team. And from what I gathered, he was able to string these wins and these world titles together through 11 guys being on the team total. With all those wins, with all those titles, there's only 11 guys that stayed on the team. So he also implemented what's called instructional school, where they were able to bring up talent and teach them more things, intricate details. So I was impressed by that. Very impressed. And they won a couple more titles after the 5 in 56 and in 58, and then went to a World Series in 60. And I think he was blamed for them losing, because they went to all the way against the Pirates, all the way to a Game 7, and didn't win. I think he was blamed for not starting Whitey Ford for pitching. And so again, neither here nor there. Wins, losses. 7 World Series in less than a decade is nothing to sneeze at. I don't care if you're considered that anybody else could take that job and do it. I think that the right man typically was put in place for that job to get that run from them. And he retired. He was fired from the Yanks, and then started up. George Weiss got him to start up the expansion team in the New York Metropolitans, and they didn't do so well there. But again, this is the guy that retired, and one of the greatest managers. I'll be honest with you, I compare him to some of the greats in other sports, and I'd say that up there with Vince Lombardi. Even though Vince Lombardi started them, I mean, it's still hard to win like that. Five straight is impressive. I think there's no other team in baseball that's ever done that.
That's a funny thing about it, James, too. After they won 5 World Series in a row, the year they didn't go to the World Series in 54, his Yankee team won more games than in the previous 5 seasons, but they ran into a Cleveland Indian team that won 111 games, the Yankees 103. So they were wildly successful in that year that they didn't go to the World Series.
Wow.
Let's talk about his heritage. You mentioned McGraw. McGraw is a Hall of Famer, also won multiple World Series, and gave spawn to Casey Stengel, who gave spawn to Billy Martin. Billy Martin used a lot of the same things that Casey Stengel did to motivate his team, to develop his team. Casey Stengel was one of the first ones to use a relief pitcher in baseball. So, I mean, he was ahead of his time. The camp you talked about is excellent. As I was going to talk about that a little bit too. But, we talked before the show, and Jack said, well, I could have managed the Yankees to 5 World Series with the team they had. Now, Jack is right to a point, right? I mean, they had an unbelievable.
I didn't mean to minimize. Listen, Casey did
I know
a really outstanding job, but I don't want to get carried away the same way we did years later with Joe Torre. Joe Torre was not a successful manager at several stops until he got to the Yankees.
It's a good
Then
point.
He had tremendous success winning 4 World Series in 5 years. I don't mean to minimize that success, but there are a good number of other managers who never won a World Series. Had they been managing the Yankees, there's a good chance they would have had similar success. But Joe Torre did a wonderful job with what he had, as did Casey Stengel to a large extent.
I mean, now you want to talk comparing. A lot of people, will say that about other managers that have a lot of talent on their team, right? And there are other baseball teams that had a lot of talent on their teams also during the 50s and 60s. To me, it takes the right type of coach at that right time. Right, Jack? I mean, I agree with you to a point.
It does, but this is all sports. Phil Jackson, 11 NBA titles he's had, okay? 6 with the Bulls, 5 with the Lakers, not counting the 2 he won as a player with the Nets. But let's talk about the 11 as a coach. Compare him to Tom Thibodeau, who's never won an NBA title as a coach. If Thibodeau was coaching the Bulls and Lakers, would they have won all those titles? Who knows? But there's a good chance they would have.
I don't know. The styles are different, Jack. Thibodeau was a pusher, right? And maybe Stengel was a pusher, had to handle, the DiMaggios, the Berras, Joe DiMaggio was a celebrity. He wasn't just a baseball player. That man was a celebrity. And I mean, his ego, from what I understand, was a very big ego. So, I mean, you got to deal with these certain things. Billy Martin was totally different than Joe DiMaggio. Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford were partiers, right? We know these stories. But yet Casey Stengel could keep that stuff together and in-house and still win games. Despite
Stengel would discipline these guys, Max. One thing about Stengel, he wasn't scared to stand up to any player. DiMaggio was upset because he put DiMaggio at first base the last year of his career, and DiMaggio was embarrassed. He said DiMaggio was a career center fielder, one of the best defensive center fielders in the history of the game. And DiMaggio was saying, put me in right field at least. Put me in left field. At least it's an outfield position. If you want to move me out of center field, because you think I lost the step, don't put me at first base. I never played first base. But Stengel stood up to an icon. He put him wherever he wanted. As James mentioned, I think, with Whitey Ford. I mean, how do you not start the great Whitey Ford and maximize his use in the World Series? It's dumb. Whitey Ford, one of the all-time great pitchers, not start him till the third game of the series.
Let me give you a reason of maybe why, right? Maybe he wants to use him in late games in relief. Maybe he I know he didn't, but I'm just saying maybe these are his thoughts. Maybe he thought the pitcher he put up there at the first game could win. I mean, I don't know, Jack, because I'm not there. I wasn't talking to the guy, but as a manager, as a field manager, I never heard Casey Stengel was dumb as putting players in certain positions. I never heard he was stupid. There had to be reasons for that maybe only he knew. I don't know, Jack.
He was Billy Martin's mentor. Billy Martin looked up to Casey Stengel as a father figure. Billy Martin came from a broken home, and he learned so much, Billy Martin, from Casey Stengel. Then when Billy Martin got traded by the Yankees, he didn't talk to Casey Stengel for years. He felt betrayed, but Casey Stengel in reality didn't have anything to do with the trade, reportedly. It was, the front office. But he felt Billy Martin at Casey didn't really stick up for him. And Billy Martin, no one loved being a Yankee more than Billy Martin. He was deeply hurt. Let me ask you guys this. The Casey Stangel image. He accomplished a tremendous amount, obviously, as a manager and as a player. But when you think of Casey Stangel, what is his image more so? Of the comical Mets those few years, because those losing Mets were a historical team, the lovable losers. Do you think of him as a great Yankee manager? And I'm not talking about what we should think of him as. What is the perception of most people? Yankee manager or the comical manager, the new upstart expansion New York Mets?
The Yankee manager, I would say. It's hard to really diminish what was done.
I'm not talking about diminishing what was done. I mean, we obviously that's a great accomplishment, but what is the public perception, not what it should be? I'm not talking about what it should be. I'm talking about what is there or not.
Okay. I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, because I'm looking at like Michael Jordan at the end of his career when he went to the Washington Wizards. No one thinks about that because you look at him as being a great.
James, everyone thinks about Casey Stengel being with the Mets, his comical lines, his this and that. Let me put it another way. Like, even I'll mention a great player like Yogi Berra, an all-time great catcher. But when we think of Yogi Berra, more than even thinking of the player, the public at large thinks about Yogi, the personality, all those funny lines. They think about him more so like that than as a player.
I got you.
Okay? That's what I mean with Casey Stengel. We look at him the same way we kind of look at Yogi, and we know Yogi's an all-time great player.
I'm gonna side with James here. Listen, Casey Stengel was a funny guy. I'm gonna play a clip from him here in a minute. He was funny during the whole testimony before Congress in 1958. Jack, I think you know a little bit more than the average fan when it comes to Casey Stengel. You know the funny things he said when he was a Met better than most people, where someone like James, and I'll side with James here, even though I know what you're talking about. When history is written, you might think that, hey, these funny lines are a big part of it. But really, to me, it's not. It's your accomplishments. It's what you did as a manager. And even though he didn't have a great years as a manager of the Mets and was more of a comical guy, you're going to think about his achievements like Johnny Unitas. His years with San Diego, I mean, were awful. But when you think of Johnny Unitas, you think of him as the Baltimore Colts.
No, but that's not even close to the Casey Stengel thing. When you talk about the history of the New York Mets, you talk about when they first came into existence as an expansion team. That's a big part of their history, the way they were chronic losers.
Not the average fan does not. I'm telling you, I don't. I think about the Miracle Mets. When I think about the Mets, the first thing that comes to mind is the Miracle Mets. It's not
why
them
are they
being
the Miracle Mets? Because of the big losers they were, where when they came into existence.
Listen, I understand what you're saying, but most fans aren't going to think about when the Mets were expansion team and they stunk. Not too many people think about that. The majority go right to the Miracle Mets and that unbelievable pitching staff they had. That's what most fans are going to think about. You being a little bit more of conscious of what was actually happening during the Mets when they first started would say that. I mean, what I'm trying to say, Jack, is your knowledge, and I know what you're talking about. I remember these things too. But as a fan, as a regular fan, I'm not thinking about the Mets when they first came in and stunk. I'm thinking about the World Series.
Let me put it another way, okay? When you think of Casey Stengel, when people think of him, do they think about him more as a personality or more as a manager?
That's the
another way.
Probably the
personality, and he was a great manager. Okay, I know I said before a number of other managers could have led that Yankee team because that's the nature of baseball. Don't misunderstand me, okay? He did a great job, Casey Stengel. You can't deny, all the winning that they had, so kudos to him. But Casey, like you mentioned when he talked in front of the Senate, he's a personality. He was funny. They interview him as Met manager. He'd go like this, amazing, 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 amazing. And they'd love to use his lines. He says, yeah, Ron Swoboda. He's 19 years old, and 1 year he has a chance to be 20. Like lines like that, and the media would crack up about it.
Well, on that, I'm going to play this. You're not going to see it. Just listen carefully. This is Casey Stengel addressing Congress. So if you heard it, I hope you guys heard it well. It's him asking.
I didn't hear a thing, Matt.
I didn't hear it. No.
Okay, so anyway, so what he did was he asked him about the antitrust laws, and Casey Stengel went on and on using the word baseball about 20 times. And nobody really knew what he's talking about. Then the person that was leading, or one of the people asking the questions there, asked Mickey Mantle, do you have anything to say about the antitrust laws in baseball? And Mickey Mantle said, I agree with everything Casey Stengel said, which nobody understood what the hell he said. So it was a funny moment during the testimony. And he was, another part of the testimony was when he was talking about you should be home drinking or doing something instead of, and I mean, the whole crowd laughed about what he was saying there. And if you get a chance, folks, go out there on YouTube, the Casey Stengel speech before the Congress, before the committee, Senate 1958, if you want to be exact. So check that out on YouTube. It's funny as hell. And that's what Jack was talking about as far as Casey Stengel's personality, his bigger than life personality had, sort of like the Yogi-isms that Jack was talking about. I mean, Yogi Berra was the Hall of Famer, maybe the greatest catcher in baseball history. And we think about, him saying it's not late till it's early, and then it's late again, or whatever. It's something like that.
Casey wasn't the most loved manager. His players didn't seem to hate him, anything like that, but they were neutral. They'd ask players like Mickey Mantle later on, and he'd say, well, Ralph Houk was my favorite manager by far. And he was managed by Casey Stengel for decades, yet he loved being managed by Ralph Houk. Casey wasn't a player's manager. Not that he should have been one. I'm not saying he should have been one at all. But his thing was he can make the tough decisions. If Casey were managing the Yankees today, and this is no knock on Aaron Boone, because I like Aaron Boone, I like the job he does, Casey would have taken a firmer stance with certain players. He didn't care that much about making players happy. He'd make his decisions, players would have to accept it. And in reality, that's the way it should be. But I know human nature is we want to make people happy. Managers and coaches, a lot of times, they don't want to upset their players. Like Steve Kerr's undergoing that now with the United States Olympic team. He has to deal with a lot of feelings, and it's easy for him to say, I don't care about other people's feelings. All I care about is winning. But he does care about other people's feelings because that's in Steve Kerr's DNA. That's the type of person he is. He's not going to all of a sudden bench Steph Curry, his star player, because he's shooting bad. And if he did, he would talk to Steph Curry. He'd worry about what he was thinking. But Casey Stengel didn't seem to be fazed. He didn't care about anything. He'd just make the move he thought would be right.
I was thinking as you're talking about that, Jack, Could you imagine the difference? I mean, Steve Kerr is an NBA coach. Could you imagine the difference if they decided to hire Michael Jordan as the Olympic team coach? How different those practices would have been, how much, with Jordan's personality, how different the practice would have been, how different he would have treated players. I mean, I think it would have been totally opposite. I know it's a stretch, but I'm just talking personality-wise. You mentioned Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr is a very easygoing guy. Jordan was not, and a fierce competitor.
Something's overrated, Mac. Jordan's great competitiveness. Where was it when he was owner? With the Charlotte Bobcats. Michael Jordan's is one of the worst owners. Not the way he treated people, as far as winning, managing the roster, drafting, one of the worst owners in NBA history. And if he was so competitive, he would have attended a lot more practices, which was his right as an owner, tried to rally the guys, been around more, not been in the back, say, oh, my people are going to handle it. I'll just make, certain moves and I'll take an interest in it. What was his competitiveness as an owner? He was an awful owner. Good riddance to him that he's not owner of Bobcats anymore, because that franchise went nowhere with him as owner.
I agree with that. But to me, it's different owning something than being on the floor, watching something and having a vested interest in that game. I don't think Michael Jordan had a vested interest in his team for some reason. I don't know what it was. But I think as a manager or coach on the floor, I think it would have been a little different. When you're directly on the floor as a player, I see a point. Your point's correct. Okay, so that's it for Casey Stengel, and let's not forget, as Jack said, the great players he had with him: the Mantles, the Marises, the Yogi Berras, the Elson Howards. I mean, listen, these guys were all legends, all in Hall of Fame. I mean, what Jack says to a point is right. He had great teams at almost every position during his managing.
I want to point this out too. After the Yankees fired Casey Stengel for losing the 7th game of the World Series, they won the World Series the next 2 years, and they went to the World Series the next 4 years. So my point is that Ralph Houk had never managed in the big leagues before.
But
he did a great job, Casey Stengel. He deserves to have his number retired by the Yankees. He deserves to be revered as a great manager. But my point is, this is baseball. Managers do make a difference, but not as much as in the NBA or the NFL.
But let's not leave out that Ralph Houk was a coach under Casey Stengel during all those times, Jack. So, I mean, it's not like they brought some manager out from another team.
The same system.
Go ahead, right? So all he had to do was basically steer the car that Casey Stengel helped put together or helped start up and get somewhere. So it's not like Ralph Houk came from the Boston Braves or the St. Louis Cardinals. He was in the system when Casey Stengel was the manager, if I'm not mistaken.
And I want to add another thing. Casey Stengel was a very bright guy, and this is a guy that was playing baseball, but at the same time, off season going to dental school. So I'm very impressed just him overall as a human being, a leader of men. I think
things are different then, James. You make a great point. They held other jobs, a lot of them, to have an income. They own stores, they own businesses. I remember in the 1970s, going to a high school charity basketball game out on Long Island where the Yankee players, were playing, like Elston Howard, Ron Bloomberg, and they would play in I shouldn't call it a charity game. It was a basketball game against the staff. And I guess the players are getting paid money themselves, which is fine because they would supplement their income. That's how they pick up some money in the off season. Can you imagine in this day and age today, any of the Yankee players playing in a high school, gym, playing basketball against the faculty because they're getting paid X amount? They're like sponsors. They could each pick up a few grand and kind of going on tour.
And to add to that, some players got in trouble because they went down and played in other leagues down in in Central America and South America part-time to make money. So, on the off season, they continued playing baseball, but they had to supplement their
They would
income.
get banned. Major League Baseball put a stop to it.
Exactly.
They let them know if they played in the Mexican League,
They were
going to get banned. And
Yeah.
they treated that like they were gambling.
Yeah, no doubt. So really interesting time. So we're going to let Jack talk about a light heavyweight champion, Ike Williams. Lightweight. That's I thought I said that. That anyway, that a lot of people don't know about. I didn't know about until I started researching some of the best lightweights of the 1940s, 50s. Jack.
Yeah, Ike Williams is like a player in another sport. You know a lot about him, but you don't know a lot about him. I mean, not a lot of footage exists of Ike Williams, who fought from 1940 to 1955 and held a world lightweight title at the end of the 1940s. The main footage that you're going to find on him exists him pounding Bojack, another great lightweight, into a 6-round defeat. And Ike Williams is considered one of the greatest lightweight champions of all time. Unfortunately, our perception in this day and age has changed towards a lot of the divisions because there's so many divisions. And the great fighters of modern times, they move division to division. They don't stick in one division long enough to establish themselves as arguably one of the greatest in that division. An example could be Roy Jones Jr. It's hard to say what division to rate him in. He fought as a middleweight, a super middleweight, a light heavyweight, even won a belt at heavyweight. He kind of moved around. He never stood still. It's like getting a different apartment every couple of years, not establishing yourself in the neighborhood. But Ike Williams was a lightweight through and through. And at that time, the lightweight division was one of the 8 traditional weight classes. There was flyweight, bantamweight, featherweight, lightweight, welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight. Now there's something like 18 divisions, and not only 18 divisions, there's 4 world champions per division. 4 world champions per division. Then there were 8 divisions, and there was only 1 champion. So so when you hear the fighters like Floyd Mayweather start bragging, well, I've beaten more world champions. Those world champions would have been the number 3 and number 4 contender back in the day, and the other fighters beat those guys on a regular basis. But times change, and it's what it is. But at the turn of the last century, they talked about Joe Gans being the greatest lightweight of all time. Then in the 1920s, it was Benny Leonard. Then in the 1930s, fighters like Jimmy McClellan. Then Ike Williams came along in the 1940s. And he beat a heck of a lot of good fighters, like Kid Gavilan and fighters Sammy Angot, Hall of Famers. He beat a number of Hall of Famers. But his problem, too, he was controlled, by the mob to a large point. He didn't get paid for every fight. He later claimed that he threw a fight. Can you imagine a ball player later on complaining he threw a ball game, one game? He'd be removed from the Hall of Fame. In boxing, you could tell him you threw a fight and then get inducted into the Hall of Fame later.
It's true.
Well, that's my sport. But after Ike Williams, along came Roberto Duran, and Carlos Ortiz in the 1960s, great lightweight. Then Roberto Duran in the 1970s, and when Duran made his mark as one of the greatest lightweights of all time, we would talk about who was the greatest. And Ike Williams did have support. He did have some support as the greatest lightweight in the history of boxing because he fought so many times against so many quality fighters. Then in the 1980s, along came Pernell Whitaker. And then there was talk, was Whitaker, arguably, is he the greatest lightweight of all time? And then they started making a comparison. who's a greater lightweight, Whitaker, Duran. And what happens then when the years go by, the Ike Williamses seem to be lost in time. It's just what happens. They kind of fade away as who's the greatest player of all time. Like if we talk about baseball now, not many people are going to say Ty Cobb is the greatest player of all time. Stan Musial is a better example. I think you mentioned that the other day, Mac. Stan Musial, one of the all-time great players. No one talks about Stan Musial being one of the greatest of all time. So Ike Williams was the Stan Musial of boxing, we could say. An all-time great, and just time has kind of forgotten him.
So Jack, and I know you probably know this, there was a Ring Hall of Fame at one time, right? It got
magazine, yeah.
Right, and that's where Ike Williams was originally, and then was moved to the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He did have Fighter of the Year 1 year, Fight of the Year 1 year, but he claimed, Jack. Now I know there are fighters that might have tried this besides him. They wouldn't give him fights until he got a manager, and this is when he got kind of tied in with the mob. He was
Palermo was his manager, and
right.
That's what would happen. Yeah,
right. But he tried to do it by himself, and they wouldn't give him a fight. So he talks to Limpy or whatever his name is, and he ends up representing him. And then what he was saying, as you said, he said that he shortchanged him. He wasn't getting all the purses, and then he, as you mentioned, when he testified before, I don't know, senator or whatever it was, their commission, he said that he threw a fight, to I guess get a title fight, or for whatever reason he threw a fight, and so did Jake LaMotta. He said the same thing, that he did, throw a fight to get a championship fight. So I guess that maybe was part of what was going on back then, Jack.
Oh, it went on all the time. You either had to sign over part of your contract to managers like, guys like Blinky Palermo, Frankie Carbo, hoodlums there, and they would take a good amount of your money. Or if you didn't sign with them, you had to do business, like throw a fight now and then. And then they would make it up to you later on by getting you a shot at the title, or they would manipulate the judges. And there was this fighter, Billy Graham, who fought Kid Gavilan for the world welterweight title. This was around 1950 or so. Okay, give or take a year. I'm close on the year. 1950 or so. And Billy Graham was asked to dump his manager and sign, with the Blinky Palermos, the Frankie Carbos, and he would get a shot at the title. Okay? But he refused to do it. He was loyal to his manager. He says, how could I leave him? He's with me from the beginning. I'm not going to leave him. I'm going to be loyal to him. So he eventually got a shot at Kid Gavilan's title, the welterweight title, despite not dropping his manager. But they took care of Billy Graham in another way. Billy Graham, by all accounts, clearly won the fight, yet they gave the decision to Gavilan. The judges were bought off. And Billy Graham would live the rest of his life, and he would be given the title by the public, the uncrowned champion.
Good morning, Dave. Just went over, of course, Casey Stangel. We're talking about Ike Williams and the manifestation of the mafia in boxing back then. Jack, do you think with the heavy betting today that it's possible that some fights are being thrown now or being scored different now? Do you think
it's fights are being thrown? No, fights are not being thrown. Judges are coming up with bad decisions sometimes because they're intimidated, or they know where their business interests lie.
Okay.
Now and then, I'm sure. Whether they're doing it intentionally, subconsciously, I can't say. But if a certain sanctioning body, they want a fighter to win. Let's say they want a certain fighter to win because it's better for business, and there's nothing wrong with them wanting a fighter to win, but keeping it to themselves, because some fighters are better for business. So you kind of hope deep down they can keep it going. I can understand that. That's human nature too, to an extent. But a judge might give every close round to that favorite fighter because he's better for business. I mean, you take even going back a little bit, the Mike Tyson Buster Douglas fight, going into the 10th round, one of the judges had the fight even. What the heck was he talking about? I mean, Douglas is clearly ahead, and we see things like that. Or better yet, you have Russell Peltz on the other day, the great Philadelphia promoter. He had this fight at Tyrone Everett challenging for the world junior lightweight title against Alfredo Escalera. I watched the fight, about 6 months ago, whatever. For the first time, I hadn't seen it. It wasn't televised at the time. And I had Escalera winning 11 rounds to 4. I mean, I had Everett. I'm sorry. I had Everett winning 11 rounds to 4. Yet Escalera, the guy who had the influence with the sanctioning body, he got the decision. And he lost 11 of the 15 rounds, yet he gets the decision. And I remember Russell Peltz saying when they started announcing the score, Russell Peltz was correcting the ring announcers, saying, going over to correct them. He was concerned that the ring announcer was a friend of his, was embarrassing himself by accidentally announcing the wrong score. That's how obvious it was.
Oh, that's crazy. So, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break here. I'm going to be back, and we're going to talk about the greatest head coach in Green Bay Packer history. To get National Streaming Sports on Roku TV, channel search National Streaming Sports, tap on our logo. On laptop, tablet, or mobile phone, download the free Roku app, channel search, tap on our logo. For smart TV, order the Roku device from the Roku store, hook it up to your TV, channel search National Streaming Sports, and tap on the logo. After adding the Roku channel National Streaming Sports, this is our Roku site. You can click on the live stream to see what show is playing, or go to the VOD category, weekly schedule, click on the day, and it will give you all the shows scheduled for that day. Just on your Roku TV, just by channel searching National Streaming Sports. And of course, if you don't have Roku TV, you can get a device from Roku, just like Firestick. Hook it up. Now you got a Roku TV, channel search us, and we're also available on your laptop, tablet, and your mobile phone by downloading the free Roku app, and then you can, of course, channel search National Streaming Sports. So, when you look at the Green Bay Packers and you talk about the great head coach, the first guy that comes to mind is Vince Lombardi. But is Vince Lombardi really the greatest Green Bay Packer head coach? There was a guy back in the 1920s when football started named Curly Lambeau. Curly Lambeau was a player coach. Of course, a lot of the owners, Papa George Halas, and a lot of the owners, Mara, were players also on the team because football was just starting. So they were a football coach player. This was what Lambeau was. He was a great athlete. As a matter of fact, he was in a position of halfback at that time in the 20s. Halfback threw the ball, caught the ball, ran with the ball. The best athlete was normally your halfback. So that's where Curly Lambeau played, and it didn't hurt that he was the coach and the owner, right? I mean, I'm putting myself in the best position. I'm not playing left guard, man. I want the action. So anyway, Curly Lambeau as the Green Bay Packer head coach. Listen, this guy won 6 championships as a player and as the coach, and more so as the coach as he got older. So we go right to Vince Lombardi. But did you know that Curly Lambeau has by far more wins than Vince Lombardi? He has over 200 and let me get this right for you folks out there, 204 wins as the head coach, far surpassing Vince Lombardi. Now, of course, we know Curly Lambeau, that's what the field is named after. And as Shaq's brought up in the past, they tried to change that for a while there. They were going to rename the field, but again, they brought it back and ended up calling it Lambeau Field, which is what it should be called. And And like every NFL team in the beginning, the Packers went through some financial problems. He owned a team with his friend who mainly provided the financial support. Let me get to him really quick. George Calhoun was the co-owner at the time. George Calhoun was the guy that had all the money. So Curly Lambeau had the vision, and Calhoun had the finances. Green Bay did go through some problems, folks. Green Bay almost folded up, but George Calhoun kept it going and made sure that they stayed afloat. And of course, as you know, because it's such a small market team, the Green Bay Packers are a publicly owned team, the only publicly owned team in National Football League right now. So even though they do have a president, they do have a commissioner, they do have a head of operations there, they actually have to have a vote when they sign a player. When they signed Reggie White, believe it or not, this went up for a vote by the commission that's represented by the shareholders and the season ticket holders of Green Bay. So he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So he has 212 wins. He won championships in 1929, 1930, 1936, 1939, 1944. And at that time, the Packers were the most dominant team in the 1930s of any other team. They experimented with the forward pass, because there was no forward pass going on back then. It was mainly run and laterals and sort of like a rugby slash football league. But they went ahead with the pass. In 1946, they built the first self-contained practice facility. So that was the first ever, like you see today, they have practice facilities indoors for the players. They built this, but guess what? It was terrible. It had cement on the floor, and they were getting beat up. The players were getting beat up playing this facility, so they had to go outside the facility. It was a total waste of time, waste of money. I mean, it was a good idea, but you got to put turf in there or something. They didn't have that.
It's funny, Mac. Later on, you talk about that famous championship game with Vince Lombardi, the Ice Bowl. Vince Lombardi's baby was the field. It would be an electric warmer of the field. Yes. That was supposed to be working, but it malfunctioned, and you had the worst possible field for the game. And he was in a state of shock, Vince Lombardi, right before the game, because that field that he had with his modern technology backfired and didn't work at all, and the field was crazily bad.
When you brought up the Frozen Bowl, I mean, that's just perfect, Jack. I mean, a perfect segue where you had this facility that was cement. They ended up playing Ice Bowl against the Cowboys for a championship, but Green Bay won. So I mean, even though maybe Dallas had a little bit more younger, talented players, but Green Bay again is one of the original teams. Them and the Bears. I mean, the Bears and the Giants came in. I mean, this started this whole league that we watch today and are that we are infatuated with, really. So Lambeau did go on and coach different teams. He coached the Cardinals, the Washington Redskins. He was fired out of both. Lambeau was pretty stubborn, right? Lambeau was like your typical coach player back then. It was his way, and he didn't want to hear management. And a lot of manager coaches at that time got fired by the owner. He was fired in the hotel lobby. So, I mean, it wasn't like they took him in the back office. In front of everybody in the hotel lobby, they get an argument. He says, all right, you're fired. You're out of here. But anyway, he died of heart attack in 1965. And again, we talk about living in the shadow of somebody. When you think about the greatest coaches in the history of football, Curly Lambeau, as Jack made mention of Stand Man Musical, Curly Lambeau don't come up. They talk about George Halas. If you want to go back, they talk about George Halas, talk about Vince Lombardi. They talk about these coaches that everybody knows, that were great. Curly Lambeau's just great as these coaches, but because of Vince Lombardi, he's kind of overshadowed. Go ahead, Jack.
I'm not that sure, Mac, because it's Lambeau Field. So we always hear his name, Lambeau Field, and I give the people of Green Bay and the organization tremendous credit by not changing the name. Whenever an iconic person passes away, like in the case of Vince Lombardi, there's a big rush to change the name in honor of that person. I've witnessed this with the Boxing Writers Association of America. We name our awards after certain iconic people, but if someone extremely popular passes away, my phone's going to ring, for example, and I'm going to be asked, oh, don't you think we should change the name to so-and-so? And what are we going to do? Keep rotating the names? Forget about the great people of the past? I mean, I initiated certain name changes. I shouldn't say that myself. I don't mean to be a hypocrite if it fits. But in the case of the Packers with Lambeau Field, he's so iconic, Curly Lambeau. What are you going to do? Forget his name and put in Vince Lombardi? You can argue that Curly Lambeau is a more accomplished Packer coach than Vince Lombardi. You can make that argument, can't you?
I would say this is my honest opinion on this. Curly Lambeau, it's amazing looking at his record and the accomplishment he had. I think he's more recognized because I'm me being a younger guy, not really knowing the history here. He's probably more recognized within the organization of Green Bay. But at the turn of the championship versus Super Bowl era, Vince Lombardi was the guy, which is why he probably named a trophy after a guy like that, because at the time he was the guy that was winning all the championships. I mean, I think he won like 3 Super Bowls, but prior to that it was like 5 or 6.
No, he won Super Bowl 1, Lombardi Super Bowl 2. But the year before the Super Bowl, it was called the NFL Championship game, and they won. The reality, the Packers really did win 3 in a row. It just wasn't called the Super Bowl the year before Super Bowl 1. So if the Chiefs win their 3rd consecutive Super Bowl, I don't want to hear that they made history and that they tied the Packers as far as I'm concerned.
That's not what they're going to say, Jack. That's not what they're going to say.
I agree with you, Matt.
I agree with you too as well.
And to further piggyback on James' comment there. See, I think you say it's at Lambeau Field when they come in. Lambeau Field when they announce it after the original owner, player, coach Curly Lambeau. But when today's fans think of Green Bay Packers head coaches, I don't think they think of Curly Lambeau. I think they think of Vince Lombardi. He's more modern. As you said, Jack, as the times push on, if there's another coach in Green Bay in the future that wins, say, 6 World Super Bowls in 12 years, whatever, that's going to be the newest guy. And then eventually, Vince Lombardi is going to be a thing of the past too.
I hear what you're saying, Mac, and maybe you're correct. It's very rare, but once in a while you'll have an athlete who will pass the test of time and he won't lose his iconic status, like Babe Ruth in baseball. He won't lose his iconic status, and maybe because Lou Gehrig was his Robin, he'll be elevated with him. But certain names are going to just kind of maybe fade and lose the test, as the years go by. It happens all the time. I don't think it's going to happen with Michael Jordan, but it's happened with other players like the big O Oscar Robertson. No one talks about him being one of the greatest. Bob Cousy, I'm reading a book on him now, actually. Bob Cousy was the man in the NBA. A lot of people consider him one of the greatest of all time. And I remember long after he retired, he was iconic. Now you see a list. Who are the greatest point guards of all time? And Cousy's name doesn't come up. And then you get that idiot J.J. Riddick trying to diminish Cousy, and, people with loud voices. And it's...
yes.
Yeah,
it's sad.
Generations pass. Muhammad Ali, you would think would pass the test of time because his name was, so big, and
I don't know, Jay.
I could ask James this: as a young black man, how big is the name of Joe Louis to you? Because in the past, Joe Louis was the icon of icons in the black community. How big is Joe Louis now?
I think it's probably most people probably don't even know who the guy is. I would say most people probably don't even know who he is. I do. I was a boxing enthusiast, so But I mean, he's long before my time. But man, I love the idea. I mean, his history totally, and he shouldn't be forgotten. But I guarantee you. I mean, I talk to young people now. I'm 49, and so I manage people that are I'm twice their age, and I don't know every time I ask them who is this person to you, and a lot of times people don't know who these guys are. And we're talking about athletes. Professional athletes don't know they're not historians. They don't know who these guys are. They don't look back in the past anymore.
And,
so it's
unfortunate. And just to follow up, Joe Louis beat Max Schmeling when he was part of the World War II Nazi machine. I mean, this is
historical. Yeah,
historical. Never mind Ali Frazier. I mean, that's historical too. But I mean, that is historical.
Yeah.
This is something that everybody should know. But I don't even think they would know who the Axis powers are from World War II.
Even non-historical athletes, take someone like Thomas the Hitman Hearns. I was asked to be a guest speaker at the Boca Raton Police Athletic League last winter, and I spoke to the young boxers. They're gathered around me, questions and answers. No idea who Tommy Hearns was, but everyone's excited when they hear the name Jake Paul, Ryan Garcia. Everyone is psyched. Who Tommy Hearns? Who is he? Who are I mean, how do you deal with that?
I hope you told them where to go.
And they were great kids, kids, respectful. I love speaking in front of them.
Well,
great kids. The coaches knew, to their credit. The coaches who coached them tried to impart boxing history, but they just care about social media stars in this day and age.
Coaches, show them some film. It doesn't surprise me, Jack. A lot of people don't know there are 50 states in the United States. They think it's 52 or so I mean, it's not the things have changed of importance is beyond me, and that's everywhere across the board. But this is why I'm glad we do this show. Because if it reaches somebody, as I'm putting tags to sports history and all over the place, when the show reaches it, maybe they watch it, maybe they learn a little bit something. I know every time I look up information on these things, and I consider myself I have pretty good knowledge of all sports, except maybe hockey. I know a lot about sports, and I always learn something looking things up, whether it's a stat or it's an event or something that happened. And it's just enjoyable for me to go over this because I learn too. And I hope if there's any younger people out there that see this, they learn something too. As you said, Joe Louis, Stan the Man Musial. I mean, in Deacon Jones, he's kind of losing his pizzazz now, right? Deacon Jones was maybe the greatest defensive end of all time. And I mean, you could argue that, and you could make a valid argument for that. But if you talk about who's the greatest defensive lineman of all time, I don't hear Deacon Jones as much as I used to, right? It's the Reggie Whites, Bruce.
I mean, other players come later on.
They didn't record sacks back then, and he's probably already.
Yeah, it's true, but they do. But they count them. They can look at the film and count them and show that Deacon Jones beats everybody. The point I'm trying to make is that even without counting the stats, James, this guy was a one-man wrecking crew. If you watched him, so I mean, this is the kind of stuff. Lawrence Taylor's the hot linebacker, but who knows? 20 years from now, if it ain't somebody else, right? I mean, it could happen.
We don't know how, but if you're charismatic, you can maybe win the test of time if you're an athlete. LT is charismatic.
Muhammad Ali.
If you're not Muhammad Ali, good one, James. Tyson, charisma. If you don't have that great charisma, even if you do have the charisma, Joe Louis is very charismatic, in his own way.
Sure.
But yeah.
And how can you not like the name Stan the Man Musial? How can you not want to know that guy? And the great ball player he was is just incredible. So
or Tom the Hitman Hearns, like he said.
The Hitman Hearns. I mean, what a name.
Well, it depends. I know we're coming to the end. It depends the market you played in at the time. Now it's social media. You can play in any city and be well known. In the past, if you played in, Milwaukee, like the great third baseman Eddie Matthews, you'd be forgotten about. Hank Aaron was in Milwaukee, yeah.
Great point, Jack. Thanks for joining us today. Stay tuned for Roku as we have a bunch of shows following us today. Tomorrow, the big football show. We have two big guests coming in, special guests from the AFC East. So we'll have a little AFC East talk tomorrow. Folks, have a great day. Enjoy your Saturday.